Okay, so today's video is going to be about low-income housing. So this is more like my thoughts, feelings, myths, talking about low-income housing. And for reference, if you're watching this in the distant future, I am filming this February, the year 2025, and I live in Seattle, Washington. Now, right now, you'll see that it is snowing where I'm at. But let's talk about housing. And this is going to be, of course, my experience in this Seattle area. But where you live may have different options. I encourage you to look into whatever housing programs are in your area. If you live in a rural area, there may not be any low-income housing programs. May only be in really big cities. But I'm also going to be talking about certain dollar amounts. And if some of the dollar amounts I talk about sound like astronomical amounts, please keep in mind I am in the Seattle area. It's one of the most expensive places to live in the United States of America. So let me at least begin talking about my experience trying to get low-income housing, because at the time I would be what is considered low income. But who decides that? Well, in Seattle, the city decides the dollar amount that they consider low income in order to qualify, and that changes every year. So I think there's a lot of thoughts, questions, beliefs about low-income housing. That's kind of what I want to talk about today. There are different programs out there to help people find housing. So if you happen to be a veteran, disabled, or have some other situation, if you're not considered low income, you may still qualify for one of these programs. Simply put, if you are considered low income by the standard that is set, that means your rent is going to be cheaper. Okay, so I'm going to use Seattle as an example. Seattle, you can typically find a studio apartment for $2,000. $2,000 is a lot of money, I understand. But if you're low income, you may get an apartment for $1,500 instead, which is a $500 discount basically. Now, $1,500 is still a lot of money. Please keep in mind in Seattle, the minimum wage is it's over $20 here. But if your rent is $1,500, you still have to prove that you can pay at least that much each month. Okay, there might be other programs like I mentioned. If you happen to be a veteran, there might be programs where you can get rent for maybe $1,200. But usually you're probably not going to find anything cheaper than that. I'm not really sure about senior citizens over 55 years old. There may be special housing for them that's already at a low discount rate to begin with. So let's talk about some of the thoughts of, if I lived in low-income housing, does that mean I'm going to be living in some rundown apartment? No. And that's what I want to get into, is maybe show you some footage of what some low-income housing properties look like. I tried to drive around in my car to kind of give you an idea of what some of these low-income properties look like. A lot of them were still in the process of being built, so you'll see construction there. But these are really nice apartments. They're all very brand new. They look nice, and I've been inside some of them to tour them, and they look like really great. And that's kind of the whole thing, that low-income housing can be a brand new apartment complex that was just built with all brand new features. And there can also be programs where, say, a luxury apartment has 100 units for rent. Well, they may be required to set aside 5 or 10 of those units for low-income housing. All the rest of the units, which are exactly the same type of units, those people have to pay like the high premium amount of rent, maybe $3,000 a month. And then if you qualify for low-income housing, you're only paying half that, which would be $1,500 a month. So you're still living in a nice luxury apartment. More than likely, your neighbors do not know that you're there as a low-income housing tenant. So if you're concerned about, I don't want to live in low-income housing because I don't want to live around low-income people, the poor people, keep in mind that these people still have to qualify to be able to pay, $1,500 a month. So we're not really talking about people that are like destitute people. These are people that still have jobs, and they just don't quite make enough money to meet the typical price that Seattle charges. Now, I understand if I was to discuss my time when I lived in Arizona, going back 10 years ago, I could find a studio apartment for anywhere between $400 to $500. Typical rent for a one bedroom probably went about $600, $700. But that was Arizona prices, and I'm sure things have gone up price-wise in Arizona. A lot of people that lived in California have since moved to Arizona. Kind of drives up the price after a while, and inflation. But I can remember a time when I was living in Arizona, I rented a whole 4-bedroom house, not an apartment, a whole 4-bedroom house for $1,000 a month, which of course I split. I had roommates. I split the rent, and so it was still extremely affordable to live there. But like I said, this is going back 10 years ago. Things have changed. So let's talk about some questions you might have, such as why would an apartment offer a lower rent when they could get much more money for their tenants? Are they doing it out of the kindness of their heart? Well, usually not. They're usually getting some sort of tax break in order to offer apartments at a lesser amount. There's usually some sort of government incentive for them to offer apartments at a low rate. So technically they're probably still getting reimbursed in some sort of way, whether it's through like a tax break or something like that. So when you think like, how can they afford to be offering rent at such a low rate? Well, keep in mind, they're still getting that money back to them somehow. Just not coming from you. It's not coming from out of your pocket. Another question I've heard is, what happens if I qualify for low-income housing and then like 2 months later I get a raise at my job? Does that mean I'm going to get evicted? Okay, so I've asked this question many times before. No, if you qualify, you get to move in. You have a lease. They can't kick you out. Now, if you happen to win the lottery, inherit a bunch of money from some rich uncle, get a huge raise at your job, it's not like they're going to find out and then immediately kick you out of the apartment. You're still there. You're allowed to keep living there. Now, what I don't know is that when your lease is up, they do not necessarily have to renew your lease. They could, at that point in time, not offer to renew. They may do a reevaluation to recheck your income, and at that point in time, a lot of these apartments, if we go back to what I was saying about the government incentive to offer low-income housing, is sometimes these programs are kind of set up to get your foot in the door, meaning, you know, they don't want you to be homeless on the streets. Basically, they want you that if you're a working person, you have an income, you just don't have a very high income, you get the apartment because you qualify as low income. And then what happens is when it comes around for your lease renewal, they may raise your rent. But the point is, you already have a home. You're not out on the streets. Now you have a home, and there's an incentive to keep people housed in that way. So it's like getting your foot in the door. But then down the road, they don't have to keep offering you this low rate for rent. So you may have to pay a little bit more when it's time for your lease to renew. But at that point in time, it's like you've at least got your way into that apartment complex, which could, like I said, be a completely luxury apartment. And even if your apartment was designated as low income, now you are not considered low income anymore, but you're still going to stay in the same unit. They would just remove that as a low income apartment and probably designate a different apartment as low income so that they can still continue to get their tax breaks. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the time that I tried to apply for low income housing. And like, I would totally qualify as far as the amount of money I was making at the time based on the rate that is set for the Seattle area. Like I said, that rate changes, so I can't necessarily give you the exact range or dollar amount. It also depends on how many people are in your household. But usually you can find that information online and Google it. And so for your area, if you happen to live in New York, you happen to live in San Francisco, you know, look and see what's available in your area and if they have a program like this. But what I did, and you'll probably hear this a lot, is when these brand new apartment complexes get built, they are built specifically for low income housing. And sometimes the agreement is for the first year or 2 years, they can only offer low income housing. After that, they can offer regular rent to any person that's looking to rent. Like a millionaire could live there. But when they first open up a property, you of course have to apply. You have to give them your pay stubs. They have to contact your job. If you have income from other sources, they have to verify all that. A lot of times there can be a wait list for a property. If it's one of those properties where, let's say, they only have 5 units set aside, you can be on the wait list until one of those units come available, and it could be years before one of those units come available. But if it's one of these brand new properties that just got built, usually that's open to anyone. There's usually not a wait list. You just have to qualify financially. So I went and I applied to this brand new community that was being built. They gave me a tour of the apartment. They told me what the rate was going to be, how much I would have to pay for rent. A lot of the times apartments, like utilities, will be included in the rent. Or if you have a car, you have to pay for a parking space. If you have pets, you have to pay for pet rent. Anyways, they basically said, like, here's what the rent amount is, and here's the range or dollar amount of what you need to make. Meaning if you make more than this, then you do not qualify and you cannot move in there. Oh, I know how much I make per hour, and I, gave them my pay stubs, and so I wanted to, go through the qualification process. Okay, well, here's the problem I ran into. As at the time I gave them my pay stubs, I had worked a little bit of overtime at my job. Now, my job is the kind of job where, I guess you could call it seasonal, where some parts of the year you might work a little overtime, but other parts of the year you might only work like 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week. So when they want to calculate how much money you make, they take your paycheck, they see that you made overtime, and they calculate it like as if that's what you make every single pay period. And so based on that, not my hourly wage or how many hours I actually work, but based on those paychecks that I gave them with the overtime, they said I made too much money, which is completely false. I did not make too much money, but that's how they calculate it. So what I probably should have done is waited for a period of when I was only working 20 hours a week and gone in with my pay stubs, and then they would think that's all I make, when really that wasn't all I make, because sometimes I work 30 hours a week, sometimes I work 40 hours a week. It just depends, because my job is kind of flexible and seasonal like that. But I'm just throwing this out there so that if you were going to go through this qualification process, got to keep that in mind. That was disqualified me was the fact that I had worked overtime, and we're talking like maybe like 4 hours overtime, not a huge amount, but they still counted that as if that was what I made every single paycheck the whole entire year. And so that can basically throw you completely off. Then for me, luckily, I had gotten a raise at my job right after that and started making a little bit more money to where I probably wouldn't have qualified anyways. And so, just keep that in mind, that if I had gotten right in there during the qualification period at just the right time, I would have had a super low rent, and then, easy peasy from there, right? Okay, so I've got one last thing worth mentioning, and when it comes to low-income housing, if you're looking for just affordable rent in general, I know here in Seattle you can sign up for some mailing list where they'll email you and let you know about new properties that are accepting applications for low-income housing. Also, besides Seattle, one of the next cities over to the east of Seattle is called Bellevue. They have their own program. It's called the ARCH program. And let me just look that up on my phone here. ARCH stands for the Affordable Housing Rental Program. And I know you can sign up for a mailing list, and basically they'll email you anytime something comes available. I get emails all the time sent to my phone, and they'll tell me about some new property that they'll tell you what the rate is, and you should just really try to sign up for any sort of lists like that. That way you're not necessarily out there searching every single day for something. The information's coming straight to you. So look into what's available in your area, in your part of the country, and thank you for watching.